We've had a crime wave recently in the UK, the epicenter of this being the Southport stabbings, and it has risen to public salience that lots of men are committing crimes.
Just men.
Men, nondescript men of no fixed abode, often. And I think we should probably be honest about the perpetrators of said violent crime, because if we want to keep our sons and daughters and wives safe, we need to know who is committing it and from where. And the media and the government don't like to talk about this to an absurd degree, which we'll be getting round to towards the end, because there is a particular meme that you are famous for that notes that the likes of the New York Post has a euphemism treadmill to avoid discussing this.
Whoever comes up with those, he needs a raise.
Quite, yes. So
rise. Sorry,
let's begin with one crime from earlier this week, of which demographic I'm not sure. This was on Monday. This was in Leicester Square, which is right near one of my local train stations into London. There was a stabbing. There was an 11-year-old girl that was put in a headlock and stabbed repeatedly. A 34-year-old woman, later identified as her mother, was smothered in her blood. They were both rushed to hospital. It was believed that she had been injured, but she was just shielding her daughter. A security guard tackled the man in question, the man who has been arrested and is now in custody. And we have some information on this man. So we have him down here. Right. But everyone was going, oh, he's a white chap. There we go. It's completely nothing to see here, boys.
With a typical Anglo phenotype.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
clearly,
That's like mine.
clearly a Welshman. His name is Ioan Pintaru, 32, of no fixed address. That wonderful country that lots of these people seem to be coming from, was charged with attempted murder and possession of bladed article. So very rapidly processed. I believe he's in court hearings at the moment, which means that lots of the other ones that have happened, the information been released, they could have done that quite quickly, but they didn't before. I wonder why they chose not to.
So he's been charged and he's going through the courts right now.
Yes.
So we shall get a conviction with him very soon.
Probably at the end of this week, yes.
Wow, that's the speed you usually only see for Twitter posters.
Quite, yes, yeah. Yeah, I wonder
white
if...
working class men. So why can't we do this for Axel Rudakabana?
I think it's because he's going through the Crown Courts, I was told, which means the process takes longer. But that was, again, a choice to
I was going to say, why
so.
put him through that one if we can put other people who have been going around stabbing people?
Great question. Don't ask questions. He's just a man. So, interesting.
He was a Welshman until he came to England, and then he became an Englishman.
Yes.
That's how it works.
Yeah. Second generation Rwandan doesn't factor in at all. I find this interesting because I was drawing parallels both from Rukagabana's stabbing and this chap to the Parnell Square stabbings last November that kicked off the riots in Dublin, where a 50-year-old Algerian man, also of no fixed abode, just spreading the GDP out on the streets wherever he decides to sleep, decided to stab 3 children and a school worker. What is it about these men, just men, that compels them to stab random children that they don't know? Suppose we'll never get answers on that one. There's also one in Manchester, Harry, so this should hit close to home.
Well, there's no surprise, really.
This will be in Castlefield. So this is a man charged in connection with an alleged double stabbing. Do you want to guess his Anglo name? Viet Tran, 21, also of no fixed address.
Viet what, sorry?
Viet Tran.
Okay.
Classic English name.
Yeah. Just your Smith and your Robinson. Of no fixed address, so international jet setter, I'm sure, has been charged with 2 counts of Section 18 assault, also known as GBH. Now, this is a symptom of a broader trend, and I want to bring this down specifically to London, because this is where I know, and also we've all visited, and you recently had the displeasure of being a tourist in, particularly as a woman. What was your experience of moving through London?
So I used to live in the UK when I was a teen. So this was around 15 years ago. Nobody do math on how old that makes me now. We can just ignore that. And it's funny because it was, even back then, London was multicultural. It was diverse, but it wasn't literally a third world country, which is, I fear, and unfortunately, very sadly, where it is now. And a lot of people might hear, well, that's just, it's racism. You just don't like X, Y, or Z people. But it's not just that it looks different. It's actually measurably worse. It's dirtier. It's more dangerous. I mean, we try to go to a park with my toddler, and it's actually like a third world park. Worse, because some third world countries are actually quite safe and not that dirty. There were feces, in the park. Again, it's just decrepit, and it pains me as someone who used to live here, who grew up in Commonwealth countries. So I can only imagine how much it must hurt the English people to see what's happened to their capital.
Yeah, well, one of my other jobs is working at the New Culture Forum, and our headquarters is in the infamous 55 Tufton Street in central Westminster. And so I walk down the stretch from Trafalgar Square straight through past the Houses of Parliament all the time, and it's like clambering over the rubble of the Tower of Babel. You just hear every language except English amalgamated together to form some sort of assorted Simlish. There are stains all over the pavement. There's refuse and rubbish and vomit and chewing gum everywhere. And the crowds process like a zombie horde. So you're constantly dodging and weaving to get to your destination. It's just unpleasant. And we were just in Hungary, and we said it was a total culture shock to have it be homogenous, a smaller population, nothing threatening at all, families able to walk around in broad daylight and not feel stressed. I almost didn't want to get back on the plane home.
Right. And I will add, we had Indian food when we were in London. Wasn't even good. So, I'm pretty sure that was the deal. They bring the food and they get to stay. Well, wasn't good. They have to go back. I'm sorry. I don't make the rules.
Funny that didn't work that way with like pizza and Italians.
Right.
For instance.
Strange.
Yeah, that isn't
Strange. It's almost like you can just keep the recipes and not the people.
Yeah, it's almost like we have the books. That'd be interesting. But the symptom of a broader trend is something that Alex Phillips and Charlotte Gill, two journalists that live in London, have noticed. So I want to zoom in on this conversation because there was a Twitter exchange that illustrates just how disconnected the cab-getting Westminster bubble class are from the people who actually have to live with the realities of navigating through London, as a woman specifically, on public transport. So Charlotte tweeted out, "Back to the UK tomorrow. Never had such a dread about Britain. Coming back to London and knowing how unpleasant it'll be. The demographic changes and feeling that Britain is mostly against Brits, the lack of a functional media, the feeling that something big has to happen to restore order." And this was late July, well before the disturbances, about a week and a half before the tragic Southport stabbing and the ensuing riots. So the comments that happened afterwards also coincided with this. So Charlotte decided to put out this video of her tube commute, and a man in non-ethnic regalia decides to walk around the tube shouting, and then decides to shove a pregnant woman out the way as and with her baby in the carriage there. Just decides to harass her because that's how he wants to spend his journey. And this is just something commonplace in London now. Something else that's commonplace in London as well, similar to in New York, just random crazy homeless people shoving people in front of trains. Man, Bra Shorsh, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder after he decided to shove a postman, Tadeusz Potashek, off the southbound Victoria Line platform at Oxford Circus on February the 3rd in a shocking act of random violence. Also, Mr. Shorsh, of no fixed address, who had to listen to the hearing through a Kurdish interpreter. London, very, very, very safe place. So, what's the response from the establishment here? Chap named Gavin Barwell. He used to work as a number 10 chief of staff under the Conservative government. And he says, London's one of the greatest cities in the world. One of the few downsides is the cost of housing. Why is housing so expensive, Gavin? Which is in part because so many people want to live here. If you hate it...
It's so popular.
Yes, it's just so popular. It's the stabbing capital of the world. If you hate it and its diversity, then leave. Views like yours won't be missed. Encouraging the flight of the indigenous population from their own country because of a direct consequence of government policies, making it increasingly unsafe.
Conservatives.
I wonder why they lost the election. But as you lads know, I mean, you don't live in central London. Has the diversity spread to your area and made it any better?
Oh, well, this is something I've spoken about quite a lot recently, which is that the government is trying to sneak in diversity often through the back door in smaller places like my town, which is a relatively small town filled with old English people. All of a sudden, all of the old men and women who have not being looked after by their own children, whereas 3 or 4 years ago they'd have been being walked around town by young girls, young English girls who've joined the care system, as is often a good job for young girls to go into, are suddenly being walked around by pairs of 30-something-year-old African men, not even African women a lot of the time. It literally looks like these men have just picked these people up and are escorting them around for some reason. It's very, very strange.
Yeah, I've got a wall outside my house where, for some reason, anytime one of the new arrivals, be it a Somalian woman in a hijab or a rather large African woman, feel the need to talk on speakerphone because they haven't understood you just lift it to your ear, they sit on said wall for multiple hours in their care worker outfit. So I know why they're here. I sent a photo to Kamini Drakpa a little while ago of this happening, and he just said, "This is my world, and you're just living in it."
Yeah, that's some advanced milling right there.
It's exactly the same where I live, which is southwest. So I mean, all of the petrol station staff, interestingly, are now Indian or Pakistani. All the care home staff are sub-Saharan Africans. So,
And we've seen how well that works out when it comes to emergency situations happening where the people don't know how to speak to the emergency services because they don't speak English properly.
Well, they don't know the definition of bleeding versus breathing in English. And there was a World Health Organization survey that found that 2 in 3 care workers had admitted to abusing their own patients.
Well, my grandmother actually is in a care home. She has Alzheimer's. And, it's a sad situation. But anyway, all of the staff there have gone in the last year. There's been a total turnover of the staff. So before it was local women mainly. They've gone, and now it's Indians, sub-Saharan Africans, and like you say, they don't really understand what's going on. And so my grandmother had a fall, and my mum got a phone call. Basically unintelligible, impossible to work out what had happened, impossible to work out whether my grandmother was alive or dead. So yes, I mean the benefits of diversity are definitely spreading, even to the southwest, even to the domains of the dark Anglo.
Well, see, people will hear that story who are in favor of migration, and they'll say, well, see, that's why we need the migration, because otherwise who's going to be working these jobs in the health industry, in service industry? But what they don't understand is, like, you're basically importing Indians at this point to serve other Indians, right? It's very possible to just have a smaller economy in terms of raw numbers. And actually, if you vet people, if you only ensure good people are coming, if at all, frankly, you can actually have a higher GDP per capita, which is much more indicative of a higher standard of living than raw GDP. And people also don't understand. I've heard, I've been tweeting about this, and we have similar problems in Canada. US is starting to go this way. The idea that the healthcare infrastructure would fall apart without immigrants, people don't understand that a lot of these immigrants, they are much more likely to take from the system than they are to contribute it. And frankly, if countries like Canada and the UK would just reform their healthcare system so they actually pay their doctors, the native English doctors would not be leaving to places like America in the first place.
Quite. I mean, Neil O'Brien, MP, who worked on the immigration and economics paper with Robert Jenrick earlier this year, has released data on his Substack that the ONS and HMRC don't want you to see. And his latest post, which I'll be going over on my show later, shows that in the private sector, jobs for native English people have gone down, jobs for European migrants have gone down, jobs for non-European migrants have gone up exponentially, but their real terms earnings have gone down because it's just cheap imported foreign labor that is subsidized by taxpayer benefits. And a great example of this is I used to get invited to Bangladeshi Caterer Association's dinners when I worked with Talk.
Fun.
The food was fine, but again, we have the recipe. So the reason they invited is because they were one of the only radio stations campaigning for restaurants not to be shut during lockdown. They invited Business Minister Paul Scully there and applied him with a lot of alcohol. And one of the speeches given was, we need laxer immigration because we need more restaurant staff for our Bangladeshi restaurants. But if you think about it, and there was a piece in the Financial Times that recently said the same thing, specifically Bangladeshi restaurants, it's because they only buy from Bangladeshi restaurants. So the more Bangladeshis, the more restaurants, the more customers, the more staff needed, the more Bangladeshis, and it's a self-perpetuating cultural cycle, which is a kind of colonial way of bringing people over and establishing enclaves that never mix with the native population.
Well, it becomes its own closed-off economy, doesn't it? Because this has happened even with cultures and peoples who you would think would assimilate much better into British culture, that being other Europeans. This has happened in my town, where there was Polish shops start to open up, and the Polish people who live around them only ever buy things from the Polish shops. So this is something that happens whenever you get slightly larger populations of migration. They will just recreate their own society.
Right. And I think what we don't talk about enough, and this is a huge problem in the United States especially, is the fact that these people often send remittances home. So the idea that they're coming, they're contributing to the economy, a lot of times if you're someone from Poland or India, Bangladesh, most of the excess money you have is actually going right back home. So, I mean, people like Trump have talked about, let's tax the remittances. Actually, if you're going to send your money back, which I guess you should have the freedom to do, to move it, well, that's not exactly fair if you're supposed to be brought here to contribute to the local economy. People had a fit because that's apparently racist. If you're not actively willing to sacrifice your own economy for the good of the migrants, then you're racist, I guess.
But there's obviously friction built up here between the tribes of the new arrivals of various ethnic different groups who are homogenized as one capital D diverse group, and the native population who are legally and financially disadvantaged. And when those two groups rub up against each other, there's friction. And I think women and children specifically, as we've seen with the recent stabbings and these encounters where women have been accosted on the tube, are the fault lines upon which these cultural differences make themselves manifest. Someone who's been great on this has been Alex Phillips, formerly of the Brexit Party, now a Talk TV host, who's responded to Gavin Barwell saying, Charlotte was the victim of groping twice. She's suffered intolerable harassment from men from other cultures. On friend of the show, Andrew Gold's interview, she described how she was followed home by a man in Afghani garb and had to be sheltered by one of her neighbours. She said, well, both of us want to leave London for our own safety. Since reading this, I am being inundated with messages from women with their stories and fears, thanking me for putting this deeply important issue out there. We feel voiceless, bullied, thrown under the bus by people like you. Perhaps rather than gleefully join a pile-on against women voicing her deeply held and valid concerns about her life and safety in the country she should want to call home, shouldn't you listen instead? And the reason that they need to listen is because the government has decided to tackle this problem in a very strange way. I'll just play this clip for you and see if you can spot who's doing the harassing and who's being harassed.
Nice. What? I was just looking at her. I was just looking at her ass.
Hey, go on, love. Just saying, she might like it. Just ask her if she needed a daddy.
The man in the grey suit is staring at you. Would you report it? It's him again. You can feel his breath. Would you report it?
I'm just going to let this play without sound. Do you notice a pattern here?
Yeah, the real face of sexual harassment in Britain: English men in suits.
Well, I've looked at some of the statistics from the international circumstances, and from what I can tell, white man on black woman is basically not a thing that happens ever.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen in the States.
No.
And that there's a larger population there.
Yeah, just very curious they felt the need to constantly depict white men as the perpetrators here.
Sorry, a nice interracial gang of youths.
Oh, no, it's okay. The black man is coming to stop.
Sorry, the
Just
guy.
like in the Gillette advert, he steps in to prevent someone sexually harassing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's curious. I find all these adverts on the tube, you must have seen this as you're travelling through, saying, don't stare, stand on this side. They're functionally useless because they're written in English. Yeah, not great. That.
Well, it reminds me of that. I think it was a British Army, I guess, PSA of against sexual harassment, and it's this literally white woman accosting or harassing this man of Asian descent. It's like, is that really the usual scenario for sexual harassment these days?
But
just petite white blonde women.
Yeah, quite.
They're a danger. They're a danger, I tell you.
Well, this may be why Gavin decided to say that even if you stopped immigration, and it wouldn't stop demographic changes somehow, but also it wouldn't have any impact on crime. How curious. Maybe it really is all the white men and women committing rampant sexual harassment.
I don't mean to go too off topic, but this is a deeply untrustworthy face.
Yeah, the physiognomy.
This is a deeply evil face. Britain started going wrong the second that we let men like this near the levers of power.
Again, the Tory party made manifest, I'm afraid to say. So let's just say this, right? Is it just men? As Charlotte Proudman suggests, men are attacking women like Taylor Swift. Men are going on the tube. Is it just men that try to slut shame Taylor Swift?
Well, I mean, to play devil's advocate, I have seen people say, well, actually, if you look at the men who are in prison right now or jail for sexual assault, sexual harassment, it does basically correspond to the number of like white people out of the prison population. It's like, well, if you don't jail the migrants at all, maybe you're right. They wouldn't be represented in the prison population. But even then,
disproportionate to the population as we see in countries like Denmark, you have the new arrivals committing more sex crimes than the natives.
No, absolutely. It's not disputable, but they will try using slanted statistics, like using the people who are actually prosecuted and thrown in jail, because they know the British system just doesn't bother if they're migrants, frankly.
Well, that happens with the grooming gangs, of course, as well, doesn't it? So that's a big thing that they do. So they'll say, look, most perpetrators of sexual assault, paedophilia, etc., are white, and that's true. That's true because
it's a white country.
It's a white country. Yeah, the majority of people in this country are still white, but nevertheless, disproportionate level. Then and organized grooming gangs in particular. I mean, there's a difference. I think definitely it's very definitely an Asian Muslim phenomenon. But no, they obfuscate with the statistics, of course, and they rely on the fact that actually people don't understand statistics. They don't understand basic concepts in statistics.
But also,
get away with it.
Also, even if it was a large proportion of the native population committing these crimes, it doesn't necessarily follow that you then need to import more foreign criminals.
Right.
because it's still crimes being committed.
Right.
And they're obfuscating the fact that lots of migrants are committing crimes because it indicts their open borders immigration system.
Perhaps the hope is that, like that episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns' immune system is blocked up with all of his diseases, that foreign rapists will, in a way, counteract the native rapists.
There's a delicate ecosystem balance going on.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the reason I mentioned this Taylor Swift post isn't just to indict my own music taste. It's because we know it's not just men, because she's referencing a terror attack that nearly happened in Austria. So a 19-year-old suspect...
Just Austrian men, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
In Lederhosen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Schnitzel. He wanted to kill himself and a large crowd at the concert either today or tomorrow, and this is according to the Director of Intelligence. The suspect, who is said to have North Macedonian roots... I'm sure he looks exactly like you. Wanted to use the weapons. Stelios, at it again. He wanted to use the weapons at the Ernst Happel Stadium to kill as many people as possible. He said, and this is the head of security, the suspect was clearly radicalized in the direction of Islamic State and its right to kill infidels. A second suspect, a 17-year-old Austrian citizen with a Turkish and Croatian background, had
It's just a background.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just a background.
On his phone.
Yeah. Well, funny that he started a job at the concert venue days before the Swift concert was cancelled over the terror threat. Just men.
Well, what's interesting about this as well, actually, is that this isn't the first time that there's been a suggestion that actually an attack like this might actually be an inside job. So the Bataclan massacre, which was 2016, 2017, I think, the lead singer of the Eagles of Death Metal, Jesse Hughes, maintained that the security were acting in a very strange way when he arrived at the gig, and that he said something to the manager about it. He said, "I don't like these security guys." And then he learned that a large number of security, I think like 6, didn't turn up on the day. Anyway, when he said this after the attack, he was absolutely slated for it. And I think they had some kind of charity concert at the Bataclan. He wasn't invited. And you know, he got a lot of stick for this, but he maintained it. You know, the security were in on it. And why wouldn't they be? I mean, it's an obvious weak point, isn't it?
Well, if you're hiring en masse new arrivals to do low-wage jobs, and that includes being a security contractor milling about at the entrance, not even bothering checking tickets, that is an avenue ripe for exploitation. And even if that's not the case, we saw the Manchester Arena bombing. The security guard was too afraid to be called racist to profile the guy who had the bomb in his backpack. It could have been prevented if not for this narrative that it's just indiscriminate men causing things.
And you even see a greater hierarchy emerging, because it's very safe to just blame men. And I'd say it's even safer to just blame Islam, which is an idea, and of course it's liberal blank slatism to assert that we're all the same if not for ideas, than it is to talk about these are specifically people of African origin. It's not just Asian, they're Pakistanis. And so we can see like anything to avoid talking about the actual issue at hand, which is that no, people are not all the same. There's no such thing as magic soy. You can't just import them here and expect them to be acting like actual Englishmen.
Yeah, quite. Well, there was a third chap who is an Iraqi national who's also involved in this. And he apparently also pledged to ISIS as well. But on your point, the guy that is born in Austria but of Croatian and Turkish descent, magic sword didn't work for him. They didn't work for Ruka Cabana, who's supposedly a Welshman despite being born to 2 Rwandan parents.
Right.
There is an even deeper conversation to be had here, where second-generation immigrants are bringing to bear a different ethnic and cultural identity.
I think they've actually done studies where second-generation immigrants are even, in some cases, more likely to be radicalized.
In
than
Sweden,
their parents.
definitely, yeah, quite.
And it's the same with mixed race children as well. They feel a very, very ambiguous sense of identity is often the problem. So there have been quite a lot of psychological studies of mixed race children.
Elliot Rodgers.
Where it's like, I'm not white, I'm not black, I'm somewhere in between. And that actually is kind of like a profound causes a profound sense of alienation.
Now, I've noticed it's very rare that you get somebody like a Calvin Robinson, and it's much more common that you get someone like a Meghan Markle. And Meghan Markle, when I watched that awful documentary that Netflix did on her and Prince Harry, it was very, very clear to me that she was identifying only with one side of her heritage and only with one side of her background.
Same with Barack Obama.
Yeah. So, and it seems to me when a lot of people of mixed heritage, and if there are people watching the podcast right now of mixed heritage, obviously this isn't for everybody, but a big proportion of them tend to identify more with the historically oppressed side of their heritage.
It's certainly encouraged, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something almost uniquely Western, because growing up Eurasian in Hong Kong, there was not the same sense of alienation that I think a lot of people have here, because there's frankly, I mean, it's almost kind of a paradox, but even though the West in a lot of ways is a lot more open, a lot more accepting, there is also a lot more right breeding ground for racial grievances than somewhere like, in Hong Kong and Singapore, we have tons of Eurasians, but there's no, Eurasian like crying about it. They're actually, some people complain they're overly fetishized as more attractive than the locals. But you even have people like Colin Kaepernick, who I think he looks like he might be biracial, but he was raised entirely by white parents. But he, more so than anyone in the United States currently, is harboring that racial grievance against white people.
Quite.
Well, I actually think in some sense with somebody like Colin Kaepernick, I think he feels that being raised by a functional white family is an indictment of black families. I think he deeply feels that. I think it's like, actually, a white man stepped up and was my father.
Maybe it is an indictment of black families, but that's not the fault of the white people.
It reminds me of that James Baldwin quote that goes around when he's talking about visiting the Swiss village. Yeah. And he talks about how the only thing that he felt there was a kind of indescribable rage at the fact that he was surrounded by a people who were able to build a functional society and live in peace, whereas his own people weren't.
And you need to make up Wakanda in order to make yourself feel better. And even then, it still has dirt roads and favelas.
Still, if Idris Elba or somebody actually wants to make Wakanda, more power to it.
Well, the Black Hammer guys tried it, and it didn't exactly go so well, did it?
Akon tried it as well, didn't he, I think?
He tried installing... And Mr. Beast, though. Yeah, maybe not that one. So just to breeze through, someone else who's been getting blamed for this epidemic of violence against women and girls is Andrew Tate. I'm sure it's influencers doing this. I know the guy that did the stabbing at first was Romanian. Maybe he's just an Andrew Tate fan. But the police chiefs in the UK have been branding the violence against women and girls a national emergency after they found that more than 1 million violent crimes against women and children were recorded in the 12 months of March 2023 to 2024, equivalent to almost 3,000 crimes a day. The average age of suspects accused of abusing the girls is 15, while the average age of their victims is just 13. Now, Dame Rachel D'Souza's looked into this and said that online adult explicit material is cited in many of the transcripts when it's children to children. But then there's also another cohort that's mentioned in this article that's sort of smuggled in. And they say, a report issued by the National Police Chiefs Council found 1 in 12 women are victims, 1 in 20 adults, or 2.3 million people in England and Wales are perpetrators of violence every year. So there's the children doing it to children, but then there's women who are being attacked by men. Men radicalized by Andrew Tate? Well, okay, let's look at some of the examples. Let's breeze through. Tower Hamlets man, jailed for years of sexual abuse here.
I'm surprised they put the name in the headline, frankly.
Yeah, they usually don't even put the photo in. They usually put the photo of the crying victims and just bury it. Investigation into Dulon Mia, English man, began in 2022 after one of his victims came forward reporting she had been abused since she was a child. Then there's Sheffield man, assaulted a 5-year-old girl. Darren Nelson, 22. Just man. Yep. Okay. Sex offender, 29. Allowed to walk out of a hospital in London. Lewis Collins. Okay. It must be. Yep. Okay. All right. They say in here he's a pornography addict. That's definitely the reason.
And that's probably part of it.
Yeah, it's definitely part of it. But not
but also
all young lads that are stuck on that sort of material by those predatory companies go on to become sex offenders.
I think it's in America at least. Black populations in America consume a ridiculous amount more pornography than most other demographics.
Yeah. But again, the argument will be white people are a lot more likely to be convicted for it. So even I've gotten into this with Black nationals talking about the different crime rates, the different races. The first thing they'll do, look at all the white pedophiles, look at all the white, child pornography viewers. With those specific cases, it's usually a case where if it actually gets the attention of the authorities, it's because family members have actually decided to speak up. I very much don't believe that it's just that Black children are getting abused less in this regard. I think it's just that it's being reported less. But it's another case where we have a discrepancy in reporting that people are saying like, oh, well, actually, it's not more crime. Like, no, that's very idealistic. And also from the American perspective, I will just say, growing up, you would often hear Europeans kind of look down on American crime rates. Like, oh, you guys are so dangerous. Now that Europe is finally having to deal with the diversity issues that America has had to deal with a lot longer, it seems like those same crime issues are following.
Well, what's interesting is that the black population of America is about 14%, and obviously it's going to be men from the ages of 12 to 40 committing the majority of that violent crime. In Britain, the black population's only ever been about 3%. Now, the first-generation migrant population is 14%. It's creeping up to Ellis Island numbers, and we're seeing that spike in crime. But I'm sure it's just men perpetrating it. In Paris as well, they're getting the same thing. There's an Australian woman who was chased into a kebab shop, 25-year-old Australian tourist, right before the Olympics happened. She claims to have been gang assaulted by 5 men of African appearance. According to the reporting on this from Remix News that I found, foreigners committed 77% of all solved rapes in the Paris area of 2023.
Her first mistake was to run into a kebab shop.
Yeah, quite. I mean, to be fair, the owners and the patrons also fought those men.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they did muck in. But they themselves, I don't think, could speak English because French/foreign. So she had a hard time communicating until the police showed up, and she said that 5 African men had done this to her. Not just sex crimes, of course. There was the stabbing of a soldier. This is Anthony Isan, Englishman, who stabbed Lieutenant Colonel Mark Teaton, who's in his 40s. Ever since then, various people have been told not to walk around in your military uniforms in case you get attacked as well.
That's a good sign in your own country. You can't walk around in your military uniform without getting attacked.
Yeah.
Definitely not a sign of
that was a problem as well in this country during the Troubles, of course, wasn't it?
Yes, and we've continued that on for some reason. There's the guy who killed this couple here, who was living with them. Yostin Andres Mosquera, I think he's a Colombian national. He chopped them up and put them in a suitcase and wheeled it across a bridge in Bristol. Was caught by a local jogger. There's a samurai-wielding sword killer. He's a white chap, but don't be shocked. It's Marcus Aurelio Arduni Monzo. I think he's a Brazilian and Spanish national. So wonderful. And then there's obviously the Southport stabber here. The media decided to use the left photo for some reason in everything, whereas the sketch on the right is far more accurate to him. And so I thought I'd finish with the absurdity that this has gotten to, because you're quite famous for the following meme. But there might be something here. For example, African-type individuals, or
Parolees?
Yeah, there might be parolees here. Twisted teens is a particularly prominent one. Friends, I hate Friends that could be doing this. Friends. What's this one? Missouri firefighters. That's pretty powerful. Irate customers.
To be fair, I've dealt with a few of them in my time. They can be quite dangerous.
Persistent challenges in our school systems are another prominent one. Tandoori chefs. That's the one that's been.
Do you just have like a template loaded up at all times?
I'm just ready to go. I mean, I've stopped doing it because I was doing it so much. I did it 5 times in one day, and somebody said, "Look, just stop it. Just stop it."
Massive Goons is probably one of my favorite ones. Another massive Goons. Summer Weather. Swept New York City with gunfire, and misogynistic maniacs, who I think we should say obviously they are men, and they're the only ones at fault here.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow our series Lads Hour, where we always have a good bit of fun and have a bit of a laugh. It's behind the paywall, so you get to see all the things that you wouldn't normally see on things like YouTube. And if you want to see all the other work we're doing, you can follow us on Twitter, where we post links to everything. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.